She dropped the coffee cup. It didn't fall. It dropped, straight through her fingers like her muscles forgot what they were for. The whole cafe turned when it shattered, but she didn't notice the noise. Her eyes were locked on me like she was seeing a ghost. And maybe, in some way, she was. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her friends were still laughing about something dumb. I think one of them was showing a meme on their phone. Darla didn't move. Her hand trembled near her lap, still shaped like it was holding the cup that wasn't there anymore. That was when I realized. She didn't just freeze because she saw me. She froze because she never expected to see me again. Not alive. And that told me everything I needed to know. I had come in only seconds earlier. I hadn't even meant to. I was trying to get out of the rain. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't been in this part of the state since I buried my mother. But the sign said, "Open late," and the yellow light inside looked warm compared to the gray world outside. That was it. That was the choice. The door. The bell. The step inside. And her. She was older. So was I? But I recognized the way her lip curled slightly when she was caught off guard. I remembered that same look from 9 years ago. Back then it came just after she admitted the first lie, and right before the second. Her hands were different now. No ring. Nails painted black. Same tattoo on her wrist, though. The one she told me was meaningless. The one I later found on someone else's hip bone. My legs were moving before I told them to. I walked past her like I didn't recognize her, like I didn't see her every time I closed my eyes. I didn't say her name. I didn't stop. I just found a seat at the far end and faced the window, my pulse pounding like a fire alarm behind my ribs. I waited. It took her 12 seconds to stand up, 18 to say something to her friends, 21 to start walking toward me. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I could feel her behind me like heat, like danger, like every question I'd buried under years of therapy and silence had crawled up from the dirt to breathe again. She leaned down, just enough for me to hear her whisper, "Lowell, I thought you were." I didn't let her finish. I stood up, calmly, quietly, and whispered back, "Dead? Yeah, you made sure of that, didn't you?" And that, my friends, is where the Lowell story begins. She didn't answer. Her mouth opened like it wanted to form an apology or maybe a lie, but nothing came out. She stood there, still soaked in that cafe glow, but her face was pale and twitching. One eye blinked faster than the other. Her left hand clenched, then unclenched. I remembered that hand. I remembered the ring I bought her from a pawn shop in Carson City when we were both broke and still believed in redemption. But she wasn't wearing it now. Of course not. She gave that up the same night she gave up on me. 9 years ago, she vanished without warning. No packed suitcase. No tearful goodbye. Just a Thursday morning with lukewarm coffee in our sink and an empty spot in the bed next to mine. I thought maybe she went to visit her sister, or that she was mad and giving me one of her silent punishments. But by evening, her toothbrush was gone. So was her phone. And her old blue journal. The one she swore she never let anyone read. The one I later found out was full of passwords and fake names. I filed a missing persons report 2 days later. The detective barely looked up from his computer when I walked in. "Probably just left you, man," he muttered like he'd said it 1,000 times before. "Wife gets bored, finds someone else. Happens more than you think." But something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her medications, untouched. Our bank account hadn't been touched in 72 hours, and her car was parked on the other side of town with the keys still in the ignition and the driver's door left wide open. There was a half-eaten banana on the passenger seat and a gas station receipt under the wiper blade. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. I went numb on the 4th. The police gave up after a week. They stopped returning my calls. Her parents, distant as they always were, assumed she ran off again. They called it one of her phases. They said, "Darla does this sometimes. What the hell kind of daughter disappears for fun?" But then, 1 week later, I received an email. No sender. No subject line. Just one sentence in the body. "Don't look for me, Lowell. Please." That was it. I showed it to the cops. They shrugged. "Guess she wants space," they said. I showed it to her friend Amanda. Amanda laughed nervously and said, "She used to joke about doing this. Like, just vanishing." Vanishing? That wasn't a joke. That was a blueprint. I went dark for a year. Quit my job. Moved back in with my father in a house that smelled like paint thinner and regret. I couldn't eat without feeling sick. Couldn't stand the way my name sounded in other people's mouths. I started writing letters to her that I never sent. By the third month, I had written 112 pages of questions she'd never answer. Until tonight. Until that moment in the cafe when I realized she saw me the way someone sees a corpse walking upright. And that confirmed something I'd never said out loud to anyone, not even myself. She hadn't just left me. She made the world think I had died. And now, for some reason, she looked terrified that I was alive. So I said one more thing, soft but sharp as a scalpel. I want to know why. Her lip twitched. Her fingers curled in. She glanced at the door like it was calling her name. But then she leaned in so close I could smell the citrus perfume she used to wear in spring. Her whisper cut through me like a needle. If I tell you the truth, someone else might die this time. Then she turned and walked away. When she left that cafe, I didn't follow her. Not right away. I watched her reflection in the glass as she walked out into the drizzle. Head low, coat collar pulled up like she could hide from her own past. Mine too. She turned the corner and disappeared into the blur of headlights and wet pavement. I just sat there, trying to breathe through the noise in my head. That whisper of hers, someone else might die this time, looped like static in my skull. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly a decade, and it still managed to sound like both comfort and warning. I stayed until closing, pretending to scroll my phone, pretending I wasn't shaking. The barista had to tap the counter twice before I noticed she was waiting to lock up. I nodded, left a crumpled bill, and stepped back into the cold. The city smelled like rain and exhaust. I took the long way home, avoiding the blocks I used to walk with Darla. Every corner of this town has a ghost attached to it, and most of them look like her. Sleep didn't come that night. It hadn't for years, not really, but that night it was worse. My mind kept replaying her face, older, sharper, afraid. It didn't make sense. Darla had always been the confident one, the kind of person who could lie to your face while pouring you another drink. Fear didn't belong on her. It looked borrowed, stolen, and yet she was shaking. At one point, around 3 in the morning, I sat up and said out loud, "She thinks I'm supposed to be dead." Saying it made it real, and that realization made my hands start to itch for answers. So I started where I always do, her things. I still had a box. The last physical trace of her I ever found. It had been in my father's attic all this time, taped shut, marked Darla's old stuff. I hadn't opened it in 9 years. I told myself I kept it sealed because I'd moved on. Truth is, I was afraid of what I might find. But after seeing her, fear didn't matter anymore. Curiosity did. Desperation did. I cut the tape with a kitchen knife and pulled back the flaps. It was mostly junk at first, receipts, makeup, a cracked phone case, a half-empty perfume bottle that still smelled like spring air and betrayal. Then there were papers, old bills, a few letters, and under those, a small velvet pouch. Inside it was a key, thin, brass, with a square head. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't for our house, or our car, or the storage unit I'd already cleared years ago. It had a small tag tied with string that read, in her handwriting, "Don't." Just that word. Lowercase. Like a whisper. Behind the pouch, buried under a stack of yellowed envelopes, was a notebook. Not the blue one she used for journaling, the one that went missing when she did, but a red one. This one I'd never seen before. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. None addressed to me. All unsigned. They weren't love letters. They were warnings. Each one started the same way. If anything happens to me, look for the man with the scar behind his ear. I read them all, one by one, my heart racing faster with every page. She mentioned names I didn't know, places we'd never been, and events that hadn't made sense when they happened. She wrote about a deal gone wrong and watching from the mirror. About someone named Halden who knows what you did. And one page, torn halfway through, ended mid-sentence. He said if you ever found out the truth, he'd. That's where it stopped. The next page was blank. I sat there, staring at that half-finished thought, and I swear for a moment the room tilted. She hadn't just left me. She'd been running from someone. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't lying when she said someone could die if she talked. But who was Halden? What was the deal? And why did she have a key marked "Don't"? The next morning, I decided to find out. I took the key, slipped it onto my chain, and started calling every storage facility, bank, and post office in the area. Somewhere out there was a lock that key fit into, and whatever was behind it. Darla had wanted me far away from it, which meant it was exactly where I needed to go next. It took me 4 days and 17 phone calls to find the place. The key was old, too old to match anything modern. I'd tried banks, post offices, every storage facility within 20 miles. I even called a locksmith just to ask if it matched any standard brand. He said it looked like a vault box key, the kind you'd find in rural banks back when people still trusted paper more than passwords. Then, on the fourth day, I hit something. A woman named Margot answered the phone at a place called Hollow Ridge Safe Deposit and Security. She sounded like she smoked menthols for breakfast and didn't trust anyone under 60. When I described the key, there was a pause. A long one. "Where'd you get that?" she finally asked. "It belonged to someone I used to know," I said carefully. Another pause. I could hear a ticking clock behind her, faint and rhythmic. "We don't advertise anymore," she said slowly. "That location's been inactive." I waited. "But if you've got a key," she added, "someone's still paying the bill." She gave me the address. It wasn't in the city. It was 2 hours north, buried in a half-abandoned industrial town called Maris Hollow, a name I hadn't heard since high school. Darla never had a reason to go there. Neither did I. But something about it rang wrong. I didn't remember anything specific, just that it sounded like a place people got lost in, or didn't come back from. I drove up the next morning in silence. The roads narrowed as I went. Trees grew thicker. Towns grew quieter. By the time I reached Maris Hollow, the GPS was stuttering, and the only thing on the radio was static and gospel. The security building was tucked behind a shuttered train depot and half-collapsed grain silo. The parking lot had one car in it, an old white sedan, sun-bleached and dusty. The building itself looked like a funeral home. No windows, just a single gray door and a camera bolted to the side that whirred when it saw me. I buzzed in. After a moment, the lock clicked. Margot was exactly how she sounded. Cardigan with cigarette burns, sharp eyes, not much patience. She looked me over like she was deciding if I was real or just another problem. "You here for box 108? She asked, before I said anything. I nodded. She didn't ask for ID, just pointed to a heavy steel door and said, "You got 10 minutes. We don't keep records." Inside was colder than outside. The walls were concrete, lined with rows of boxes, all numbered with little brass plaques. Some were missing. Some had cobwebs. But 108 was there. Lower row. Dusty. A small red thread was tied around the keyhole, like a warning. I hesitated. Then I used the key. The lock turned harder than expected. It clicked once, twice, then gave. The drawer slid out with a groan. Inside was a single manila envelope, thick, sealed with tape and a smear of wax. On the front, in Darla's writing, "If this is open, I'm either dead or I failed." I swear my breath stopped when I read that. Failed what? What the hell had she been involved in? I broke the seal. Inside were 5 items. A black and white photo of a man I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, dark suit, standing next to a van marked Mason Transport Company. His face was blurred by motion, but behind his right ear, just barely visible, was a long, jagged scar. A burner phone with the battery removed. A receipt for a motel room in Kansas dated 2 years after Darla disappeared. A typed document, no heading, no names, describing a missing shipment of undeclared material, 2 security guards going missing, and a directive to terminate the asset if compromised. And finally, a letter, addressed to me, handwritten. I didn't open it right away, because the second I touched the envelope, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, dread. Pure, animal dread. Like I had just unlocked a door I wasn't meant to find. Like someone somewhere just felt it happen. I looked up at the camera in the corner of the room. It wasn't blinking. And yet, I felt watched. I took the envelope, slipped everything into my coat, and closed the box. I didn't ask Margot any questions on the way out. She didn't look at me. She just reached under the desk, pressed a button, and the door buzzed open behind me. Back in my car, hands shaking on the wheel, I stared at the letter. Then I opened it. It was only 3 lines. "If you found this, they're watching you now. You need to disappear, Lowell. Just like I did. If you don't, they'll erase you for real this time. I'm sorry I left. It was to protect you. But now you're in it, and I can't save you again." Again. I sat there in the silence of that crumbling town, hearing the word echo in my skull. Again. And that was the moment I knew Darla hadn't left me. She'd used me as bait. I stared at that photo until my eyes hurt. The man in the picture had that kind of presence that lingers even when the image is still. He wasn't just someone who happened to be in front of the camera. He looked like someone who didn't like being photographed. Someone whose name didn't belong on paper. I traced the edges of the blurred face, studied the outline of his ear, the shape of his jaw, the curve of the scar that ran behind it like a half-forgotten accident. Or a warning. That scar. That was the thread Darla had left behind, and I was going to pull it even if it tore everything apart. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed with the envelope beside me, the burner phone still untouched. Part of me was afraid that turning it on would trigger something. GPS, spyware, whatever kind of digital trap someone like Darla had apparently been mixed up in. But it wasn't the tech I was afraid of. It was what might happen after. I was beginning to feel like a man caught in a story he hadn't written, one with too many blank pages and not enough exits. The next morning, I went back to the photo and focused on the van in the background, Mason Transport Company. A quick online search brought up a logistics company based 2 hours south, in a town called Red Hook. According to their site, they'd shut down 6 years ago after a warehouse fire and some kind of legal dispute involving missing assets. But here's the thing. The photo Darla left me wasn't 6 years old. The date printed faintly on the back was only 3 years ago. So what the hell was this man doing standing in front of a supposedly defunct company? I printed the photo, grabbed a hoodie, and hit the road. Red Hook was one of those towns that looks like it gave up on itself a decade ago. The storefronts were boarded up. The gas station had a handwritten sign that read cash only, and the clerk looked like he hadn't blinked since the Bush administration. I asked him about Mason Transport. He said it burned down, then muttered something about private security people sniffing around. When I showed him the photo, he stared at it for a long time before saying, "You should forget that face. That's not a man you find. That's a man who finds you." I laughed. He didn't. The old Mason warehouse was still there, half-charred, windows blackened, the logo faded and flaking. There were tire marks out front, like someone had been there recently. I circled the building twice before I noticed the camera above the rear loading dock. It wasn't dead. The tiny red light blinked just once before it stopped, like it had seen enough. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. A man appeared from the side alley. Tall, shaved head, suit jacket over jeans. He wasn't in a rush, but he wasn't strolling either. That deliberate kind of walk you see in military films right before someone pulls a gun. I didn't recognize him. No scar. Not the guy from the photo. "Lose something?" he asked, voice calm, hands in pockets. I forced a smile. Just curious. Place used to belong to someone I knew. He raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" "Yeah, Darla," I said, watching his reaction. "You know her?" His eyes changed. Just for a second. A flicker. The kind of flash you only notice when you're looking for it. He didn't answer. Just tilted his head and said, "You should go home." "I am home," I lied. "Moved back recently. Just asking around." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You ask too much, you don't go home at all." He walked off without another word. Got into the white sedan parked down the block, the same one I'd seen at the storage facility in Maris Hollow. My stomach dropped. I wasn't just retracing Darla's path. I was being watched for tracing it. I waited until he drove off before I returned to my car and opened the burner phone. No passcode. No apps. Just one saved number under the name. Safe. No messages. No call history. I didn't dial it. Not yet. I needed more. So I dug deeper. Back at home, I searched old archived records on Mason Transport. I found a buried lawsuit, one filed by a former employee alleging internal operations off books, hush money, and disappearing personnel files. The case was sealed. No outcome listed. But the complainant's name was there. Halden Caro. The same name from Darla's notebook. The one she said knew what you did. And then it hit me. What if the man in the photo wasn't the threat? What if he was Halden? What if the scar wasn't a warning sign, but a target? And what if Darla had been helping him, not running from him? I didn't know yet. But I was starting to understand something dangerous. This wasn't about a marriage that fell apart. This was about a woman who got too close to something and chose to disappear instead of let it swallow her. And now that I was in it, no one was going to let me walk away clean. It started with a library card. Of all the evidence I'd sifted through, burner phones, sealed documents, cryptic letters, I never expected a piece of laminated plastic to unravel the next layer of truth. But that's what it was. Wedged between the back pages of Darla's old red notebook, stuck so tight I almost missed it. The name on the card wasn't Darla Griffin. It wasn't even a variation. It said, Marlene Barnett. My first thought was, mistake. Or a fake ID. But it looked real. The card was worn, scanned too many times, corners bent just enough to make it believable. The address printed on it pointed to an apartment complex in Gresham, a small town I hadn't thought about since college. She never mentioned living there. Then again, she never mentioned any of this. I drove out the next day. Gresham was quiet in that suffocating way small towns are. Too tidy. Too still. The kind of place where people notice when you breathe differently. The complex was still there, Lakeside Arms. Faded teal shutters, gravel parking lot, satellite dishes dangling like broken wind chimes. I walked the perimeter twice before building up the nerve to go inside. Apartment 2B. I knocked once. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. I waited, ears straining for movement. Then I noticed the mailbox near the entrance. Most slots were empty, but 2B still had a name tag. Not Marlene. Not Darla. L. Barnett. L like Lowell. My skin prickled. Was it a coincidence? A joke? Or something worse? Some twisted breadcrumb she'd left behind. Knowing I'd eventually come looking? I stepped back, trying to calm myself. Then the door to 2C opened. A woman, maybe mid-40s, wearing paint-stained sweats and holding a laundry basket, stepped into the hallway and froze when she saw me. Her face didn't flash confusion like you'd expect when a stranger's lurking. It flashed recognition, not of me, but of the situation. You looking for her? She asked, voice low. I nodded slowly. Marlene Barnett. She shifted her weight, like she was deciding whether or not to tell me something that might get her hurt. Then she said, she left 3 years ago, middle of the night. Cops came a few days later. Someone had broken in. Broken in? Yeah. No signs of forced entry, but stuff was gone. Papers. Flash drives. Her laptop. Real precise. Nothing else touched. She never came back. I hesitated. Do you remember anything else? A boyfriend? A job? She said she worked remote. Logistics. But she got strange near the end. Always checking behind her, locking her windows, whispering on the phone. Then one night, poof. Gone. She paused, eyes narrowing. You Lowell? My heart kicked. Why? She had a folder with your name on it. I didn't ask how she knew. I just thanked her and left. Back in the car, I sat motionless for almost an hour. She'd taken on a new name, a new life, and still kept a folder on me. What the hell did that mean? Was I a safety net? A backup plan? Or had I been part of this since the beginning? I dug deeper. I called in a favor from someone I knew in records at a university where Darla Marlene had supposedly taken a night course years ago. She owed me from a past life. I didn't give her much to go on, just the fake name and an address. An hour later, she sent me a file. Marlene Barnett. Born in Missouri. No criminal record. Took a government-sponsored program in nonlinear data systems funded by a Department of Energy contractor. Vanished from the system in 2016. But one detail hit me like a punch to the chest. Her emergency contact on that form was me, Lowell R. Griffin, spouse. The program listed under her name was flagged with a reference code. I followed that code into a series of government PDFs online, mostly dry stuff about security clearances and digital ethics training. But in one document, buried deep in the appendix, was a reference to an investigation involving unauthorized data duplication and a Category C disappearance. I looked it up. Category C meant voluntary vanishing, potential national security relevance. Monitor subject if reappeared. Darla didn't just leave me. She was being watched the whole time. Or protected. Or maybe both. And now that I'd found her, there was a damn good chance I was now flagged too. Back at home, I powered on the burner phone again. That single number, safe, still waited in the contacts list like a loaded chamber. I stared at it, thumb hovering, and finally pressed call. It rang once. Then twice. Then a voice I didn't recognize answered. Who gave you this phone? I found it, I said carefully. In a deposit box. I'm looking for Marlene. Silence. Then, you need to stop. Right now? This is bigger than her. And it's already too late. Click. Line dead. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at the wall, every nerve in my body electric with dread. I wasn't unraveling her story anymore. I was living inside it. It was raining again. I don't even remember when it started, but I remember the feeling. Cold through the collar. Heavy against the skin. Like the sky knew what I had just learned, and wanted to soak the truth back into the dirt. The voice on the phone had said it's already too late. That phrase rang in my head like a cracked bell as I paced the living room. I had papers scattered across the floor. Photocopies, maps, notes scribbled across post-its, napkins, receipts. Her 2 names, her burner number, the black and white photo of the man with the scar. It all looked insane from the outside. A madman's puzzle. And maybe I was halfway there already. But I wasn't crazy. I knew what I saw. I knew what I had. And I knew who could help. There was one more name I hadn't chased yet. One I'd found almost by accident while digging through the lawsuit involving Mason Transport. An investigator, private, former NSA, had been hired by Halden Caro legal team as a forensic liaison. His name was Ellis Dane. I found an old archive podcast where he talked about silent assets and unauthorized cognitive mapping. It sounded like sci-fi babble at the time. Now I wasn't so sure. I tracked down an address. He lived 2 towns over in a house buried behind rows of overgrown hedges. I expected no one to answer, but after 4 knocks, the door opened a crack. A man in his 60s, wearing a threadbare sweater and holding a cup of coffee, peered out. "You followed the wrong trail," he said before I could speak. I froze. "Excuse me. You've been calling storage units, visiting dead warehouses, waking old names. You think they haven't noticed? I need answers. You already have them. You just don't understand what they mean." I stepped forward. Darla Griffin, or Marlene Barnett. Whatever name she used, she was my wife. She disappeared. Now she's back, terrified. She thinks I'm supposed to be dead. Why? He opened the door a little wider and gestured for me to come in. Inside, the house smelled like dust and electricity. Books stacked on every surface. Walls covered in corkboards pinned with news clippings, old IDs, government training manuals. In the center of the room, there was a whiteboard with the word asset written in red marker. Just that. All caps. "Darla wasn't the one they were tracking," he said quietly. "You were." I laughed, bitter and confused. "Me? I was a clock repairman. A substitute teacher." He cut me off. "She inserted herself into your life in 2013, right?" I blinked. "No, we met in 2009. College." "No," he said calmly. "You think you met her in 2009. That's when the insertion began. New identity. Fabricated history. You've never met her family, have you? Never seen photos of her before a certain year. She was planted." I felt my knees weaken. "That's not possible." He turned and pulled a file from the shelf. Inside were surveillance photos. Darla, young, long hair tied back, speaking with men in military uniforms. One photo had a timestamp from 2007, 2 years before I supposedly met her. Another was from 2010. She was outside a building marked as Dynatrol Cognitive Lab. "Your memory has gaps, doesn't it?" he asked. "Places that feel foggy. Events you remember differently than others." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He was right. "She was your handler," he said. "And you were the asset." I swallowed hard. What kind of asset? Not a spy. Not a killer. Something more experimental. Cognitive testing. Long-term behavioral analysis. They were trying to map memory resilience under false identity conditioning. You were part of a data pool. The control. Only you weren't supposed to know. I would have remembered. Not if she was doing her job. And she was. Until she wasn't. He pulled another photo. This one was of the man with the scar. Halden. He was the leak. He figured out they were using people like you without consent. He tried to go public. She helped him disappear. That's when it all unraveled. And she left me? No. She saved you. You were on the termination list. She faked your neurological collapse, wiped the digital trail, and disappeared. The problem is, you started remembering. I sat down, stunned. My mouth was dry. My thoughts were louder than the rain. "You said they're watching. Who are they?" He didn't answer at first. Just looked at the window, like he was expecting someone to be watching from behind the glass. "They're the kind of people who erase cities from satellite images when a test goes wrong. The kind of people who make you forget your own name if it means protecting a protocol. Not CIA. Not FBI. Something deeper. Older. They don't use acronyms. Just directives. Then why let me live now? You're not a threat anymore. You're a curiosity. A failed file that woke up. But that doesn't mean you're safe." He handed me one last piece of paper. A list of names. Most were redacted. 3 weren't. One was mine. Next to it, active. Memory returned. Monitor. Below that, one final line handwritten. Darla/Marlene, status, unknown. I stood up. I need to find her. She doesn't want to be found. I don't care. Ellis sighed. Then I hope you're ready to disappear. For real this time. The letter arrived 3 weeks after I spoke to Ellis. No return address. No postage. Just a plain white envelope slipped under my apartment door in the middle of the night. Inside, a photo, a map, and one word written in blue ink. If. The photo was of a house, small, wooden, buried in pine trees near a lake. The kind of place you'd assume had no Wi-Fi, no cell reception, no neighbors for miles. The kind of place built for disappearing. On the back of the photo was a date, April 14th. A week from then. I sat with it for hours. I had questions, still dozens of them, but also an answer I didn't expect. I wasn't being hunted. Not anymore. Not if she was reaching out. The directive had shifted. Maybe because I'd stopped digging. Maybe because I'd finally passed whatever test they'd built into this sick maze. Or maybe they were just done with both of us. I drove north for nearly 6 hours through winding back roads and sunlit forests that felt untouched by everything the world had become. No GPS. Just the map and the picture. I arrived the night before. Slept in the car with the windows cracked, dreaming of the past like it was still happening. The next morning, I walked the last quarter mile up a gravel path lined with moss and silence. She was already waiting on the porch. Darla, or Marlene, or whatever name she lived under now, looked different again, but not in a way that suggested fear or fatigue. She looked free, like someone who had finally outlived the weight of everything. She wore a flannel shirt, hair pulled back, no makeup, no mask. Just her. And for the first time since this entire thing began, her eyes didn't carry fear. She smiled. Not the tight-lipped kind from our last encounter. Not the rehearsed kind I used to know. A real one. Sad. Gentle. Honest. I stood at the base of the steps for a long time, staring up at her, trying to memorize the moment in case it vanished too. You came, she said quietly. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to, I replied. She tilted her head. You weren't. But you came anyway. You always do. I didn't have anything left to say. Not in that moment. So I just stepped forward, slowly, one step at a time, until we were inches apart. She reached out, her hand brushing the side of my face like she had in another life. And then she pulled me into her arms. We stood there, holding each other, with nothing but the wind and the birds between us. No words. No need for them. Later, we sat by the water. She told me some of the truth. Not all of it. Some parts were still bound by silence, by things that lived in locked rooms and redacted files. But enough. Enough to understand that she hadn't been running from me. She'd been running for me. Protecting the version of me they had tried to erase. The one she fell in love with by accident. The one she stayed with too long. And eventually, the one she saved when it all went wrong. I used to write to you. I told her, voice breaking. Hundreds of pages. Letters I never sent. I read them, she said. I turned to her, startled. What? You left your journal in the box, she smiled softly. You thought it was yours. But it was always mine. I laughed, a cracked and disbelieving sound. And then I started crying. For all of it. For what we lost, and for what we'd somehow found again. We stayed in that cabin for 3 days. No phones. No questions. Just presence. Quiet. Warmth. Like people who'd been through fire and were finally sitting in the ashes, not to mourn, but to rest. When I left, I didn't ask where she'd go next. She didn't ask if I'd follow. We both knew this was the goodbye that didn't need to hurt. Because it wasn't the end. She pressed something into my hand before I walked away. A key. But this time, there was no tag that said don't. There was just a number, 23. I looked at her. She shrugged. You'll know when. I haven't used it yet. Maybe I never will. But I keep it on my chain, right next to my house key. A reminder that sometimes, the people we think left us were just fighting battles we couldn't see. And sometimes, the ones who vanish aren't lost. They're just waiting to come home in their own time. 9 years ago, she disappeared. Now, I finally understand why. And somehow, against every rule, every threat, every impossible detail, I got her back. Even if just for 3 days. That's more than most ghosts ever get. And that's enough.